senior managers at the bank, he called me up to be his PA, his personal assistant. And in that interview, at the end of it, the general manager said, "You can have this job, but you're going to have to choose between the bank and the church." But actually it was a blessing because he put it right on the line for me. Golgotha is for everyone. No one escapes the cross, but he would continue. God does not save us from the cross. God saves us in the cross. As a grace to be able to take the suffering, which is real, and to offer it up for another becomes an enormous grace and gives us joy. It's not wasted.
We're here today in Assisi, Beyond Saint, with Monsignor Figueiredo. I hope I said that right. Thank you, Father, for having us here today. It's really such a special treat. And I wanted to ask you about your personal journey and how you were called to the priesthood.
It's always God who calls, and we know that. But certainly at every moment in one's life, God is present. And part of our discernment is to recognize how God is present. I'm originally from Goa in India. That's where St. Francis Xavier did his missionary work, the great missionary. I was born in Africa, in Kenya. My father was working for the British government. And when I was 3 years old, he was moved to London. So I really grew up in London, went to university there, did everything a young person would do, worked on the stock markets in London, in the city, for the largest bank at the time. And then there was, I remember, an interview with one of the senior managers at the bank. He called me up to be his PA, his personal assistant. Completely unexpected. He was interviewing 5 or 6 of us. And in that interview, at the end of it, the general manager said, "You can have this job, but you're going to have to choose between the bank and the church," because I told him I'm interested in the church. And it may sound harsh what he said, but actually it was a blessing because he put it right on the line for me. And that was a very important moment. I was ordained in the United States, in Newark, New Jersey, because my vocation was nurtured through one of the movements in the church, the neo-catechumenal way. But I was sent to study in Rome, where I received my doctorate, and then was sent back here to Rome at the Vatican to work at the Vatican. So I worked at the Vatican some 10 years and also at the North American College as one of the spiritual directors. So I would say the vocation comes from God. It's certainly nurtured through our history, the events. I remember when I was at school, Dominican school in England, and it was a large amount of students, over 1,000, and the headmistress, Dominican sister, was called Sister Anthony, and we used to call her the mighty ant. She was tiny, but we used to call her the mighty ant because she would get into places you would rather her not get into. And I was walking along the corridor one day, and she pulled me aside and simply said, "Have you ever thought of being a priest?" And I was 30. She didn't say anything else, and there was no pressure. But it was like a mosquito in my ear. It never left, and it was troublesome. But I think that's what we need. We need people really to have that courage to invite others into the priesthood. Certainly my parents, very influential. School, very influential. Seeing joyful parish priests was very influential as well. And our own history, discerning, recognizing God speaking to us, just like the young Samuel calling through the events of our lives.
You've accomplished a lot in your life. You have a PhD, you've lived all over the world, and now you are kind of the guardian, I guess, of the Carlo Acutis relics and body and church. We're going to get more into that. But first, let's talk about, I read that your mother was told to abort you.
That was very significant. I was born in the 60s, and it was the time that mothers were given a medication to help them sleep with morning sickness. It was called thalidomide. You may have heard of it. It was a German medication. It was a very good medication, but there were batches of that medication which clearly were not good. And so many kids in those years were born without limbs, arms. I'm very blessed. I was born without one hand. Imagine many may remember Tony Melendez, who sang in front of Pope John Paul II, had no arms, but played the guitar beautifully in front of her.
I don't know.
Yes.
I would love to see it.
Very moving. So yes, knowing that I would be born with some disability, the doctors put a lot of pressure on my parents in Kenya to abort. And with the argument, how can you look after someone who's going to cost you time, effort, take your own lives away to raise a handicapped child? I didn't know this story. My parents told me on my ordination day this story.
Right.
And absolutely, yeah. And the response they gave the doctors, that if God has allowed us to conceive this child, God will have a mission. And
Beautiful.
And I believe that's why they wanted me to know that the day of my ordination. I knew Mother Teresa quite well. We used to correspond with each other, and we met on several different occasions. And I asked Mother Teresa once, why is it that I only have one hand? I wanted to know from a saint. And Mother Teresa took her larger hand. She took my smaller hand, placed one against the other. And she said, Father, I have a larger hand, you have a smaller hand, but in the eyes of God, they're both hands. And I think that's important, because so often we judge people by the accidents, the accidentals, the external characteristics. That's a Down syndrome child. But in fact, they're a child of God. That's our deepest character. Our deepest character is to be a child of God. And we have souls that are made for God, come from God, and made for God. And that's how we need to characterize ourselves. And so Mother Teresa, she said to me, Father, every night before you go to bed, I want you to pray the gospel of the 5 fingers. And I was studying for a doctorate in Rome, and I was saying, I thought I knew it all. I said, I already know the 4 gospels. And she said, I'm going to teach you the most important gospel of life, which is gratitude. And she said, every night before you go to bed, pray the gospel of the 5 fingers. From Matthew 25, you did this for me. 5 words, you did this for me. That's the gospel of the 5 fingers. We pray that in front of the cross, in front of suffering.
That's beautiful.
It's the ladder that takes us to heaven. Carlo Acutis would tell us, this young boy who suffered at the age of 15 and died, that Golgotha is for everyone. No one escapes the cross, but he would continue. God does not save us from the cross. God saves us in the cross. There's a massive difference.
We all have a cross, like we all have something.
And without it, we would not reach heaven. Because if you look at the lives of the saints, there's always something.
I live with chronic pain. There's like not a day where I don't have pain. And I used to be so upset about it. And then Father Thomas was like, offer it up. I'm like, what does that mean exactly? And I try to, I understand it now, but I try to explain it to others who are going through pain. And then sometimes I forget that I'm offering it up, and then I'll start feeling sorry for myself. And then I'm like, okay, this is my cross. I'm just going to ask God to, if I can't get rid of this, to help me cope with it. You think that's the right approach?
I've really seen that in my life. The cross becomes a grace. What seems the greatest defeat in life, which is the cross, becomes the greatest salvation for the world. And that's the same for each one of our crosses. And in front of the cross, we have a choice. We can be the bad thief who rebels and is angry and laments, and we remain bitter. Even though it's a suffering, no one takes away from the suffering. Or we can be the good thief who embraces the cross and turns to Jesus. And Jesus says, "You're with me in paradise." And it changes everything. I can talk. In fact, just yesterday, I anointed someone at the hospital who was dying, and the family was there. And I can talk till the cows come home, preaching the gospel. But when I say to these people, I too suffer because I have a cross, and for me it's very visible, it changes the discourse completely, because then we're on the same level. Everyone has a cross. The one thing we all have in common, because we all have two eyes, but every eye is different. We all have two hands, or perhaps one hand. Everyone is different. But the one thing every person in the world has in common, we all have a cross. And that cross is, again, that ladder to heaven, because, as you say, God used it as a grace to be able to take the suffering, which is real, and to offer it up for another becomes an enormous grace and gives us joy. It's not wasted. It's not wasted.
Thank you. You just spoke about basically, is it giving the last rites? How do you say the right, or doing the last rites? Do you notice a difference from somebody who's not practicing to somebody who's practicing? Have you noticed a difference in how they're basically going through the process of death?
I certainly do notice the differences, but I must say that suffering, ill health, death itself, when it approaches, becomes that gift that even those who have not believed all their lives, in fact, it's a gift from the Lord, because it helps us turn to Him. And certainly if we don't have faith, it's very difficult. That's what I have noticed. And it's not magical. It's not magical that it will suddenly appear. Remember the story in the gospel of the 5 virgins with oil and the 5 who don't have oil. What does that oil represent? Because the bride is coming, the bridegroom is coming, and all of the virgins are waiting there with their lamps. But there are 5 who don't have oil in their lamps, and 5 have taken extra oil in their lamps. And when the 5 see the bridegroom coming, and they say, "Give us some of your oil," and the others say, "We can't. We can't." Why? What does that oil represent? It's faith. I can't say, "I'll give you 50% of my faith." You either have it or you don't have it. That's why the whole of our life is like a gymnasium where we are invited really to build that faith, so that when the cross comes, when that moment of suffering comes, when death approaches, we can enter into it with a certain serenity. That is Carlo Acutis, 100%. And I have seen that difference with people who have that faith. They approach death in a very different way, because they know that God is with them. That's why Pier Giorgio Frassati, canonized with Saint Carlo Acutis, would say, "The day of my death will be the happiest day of my life."
What a brave man. I'm a little scared of death, even though I'm a believer 100%, and I'm like an apologist and I'm an evangelizer, but I'm still a little afraid.
I understand, and that we would not be human if there wasn't that fear. But you know what St. Carlo tells us, this 15-year-old boy? He says, there is no need to be afraid of death, because with the incarnation of Jesus, death becomes life. In heaven, something extraordinary awaits us.
If Carlo was alive today, what do you think he'd be doing? Do you think he'd become a priest, or do you think he'd just become like this holy man with a family? Maybe a consecrated person. What do you think?
Well, certainly Carlo did express to his mother, perhaps he was thinking of the priesthood. It's interesting, Pier Giorgio Frassati was the same. But again, another one of Carlo's sayings, only the one who does the will of God is truly free. So I just believe that Carlo would have discerned what is the will of God for me, using his talents, his skills. As we know, he was a genius with the internet. He put onto the internet a website with 136 Eucharistic miracles, then set up another website on the four last things, heaven, hell, purgatory, and judgment. He was beginning to set up another website on the saints. So he was a genius. And Carlo's great desire was to make Jesus known. That is the point. And so I think Carlo would have said, how best can I make Jesus known? Whether that would be a priest, whether that would be a layperson, whether it would be married, that was his intention. And I think he would be the kind of guy who would say, let me discern well. Use our talents for the glory of God and to bring salvation to souls. Again, excuse me repeating all these sayings of Carlo, but the sayings of Carlo, they're like tweets, they're tiny, but Carlo says everything where great theologians have written treatises about. But Carlo would say this: to love what awaits us tomorrow, give the best of your fruit today. And I think that's the answer to the question, where can I give the best of my fruit today in view of what awaits us tomorrow? And ultimately, the mission of every single person in life is heaven.
Of course.
And the salvation of souls. I married a couple just yesterday in a beautiful city called Todi here. They were from the United States, a young couple. They weren't particularly practicing, but I told them in the homily, I turned to the husband, Greg, and I said, you know what your mission is now that you're married, is to take your wife to heaven. And I said to his wife, Lucia, your mission is to take Greg to heaven. And if God gives you children, your mission as a couple is to take your children to heaven. Where that is out.
And our friends, even if you're not married, to get them to heaven.
And that's a beautiful thing, because what will heaven be? We will be reunited with all our friends and all those we have brought into heaven, and we'll be looking upon Jesus night and day. In other words, heaven will be a constant Eucharistic adoration.
Yes. Father, I always think to myself, I know the life of Carlo Acutis pretty well, but what makes a child who is from two non-practicing people just gets so, he's not really exposed to the church, gets so, basically, I don't know if obsessed is the right word, but taken this giant, fiery passion towards Eucharistic miracles and the church and Jesus and Catholicism. What do you think that is? How do you think that happens?
Well, it certainly is a mystery. I think you've just walked past the sanctuary where Carlo lies here in Assisi, and there are thousands of people. This place was unknown previously. Just in the month of August 2025, we had some 200,000 people come through that sanctuary. And in every corner of the world one goes to now, Carlo is present. It's a mystery, really. His parents were not churchgoers. By their own admission, they went to church for their baptism, their first communion, and marriage. That was it. And what is it that brought Carlo back? I often use this analogy. Grace is falling. Grace is offered to all of us, that unmerited favor of God. But we can choose to put up an umbrella and prevent that grace from falling upon us. Or we can simply say, I'm going to let that grace fall on me and I'm going to cooperate with it. And that's what Carlo did. And he did it in an extravagant way, I would say, an extravagant way. And he began early. I think that was really key. It's interesting, Pope Leo, in his homily for the canonization, he gave the example of St. Francis of Assisi, he gave the example of St. Augustine. Both of them had sordid lives. But he said, Carlo began young. Pier Giorgio Frassati began young. And I think it does make a difference. It's very true. Every saint has his or her past. Every sinner has his or her future with God. And so it's never too late to begin that conversion, but better to begin early because we save ourselves a lot of trouble. A lot of pain for ourselves and others. And it's really true. We don't know when that moment will come of suffering and death, and we need to be ready. We need to be ready. Imagine to begin young, to say, at 7 years old.
It's just insane to me.
Extraordinary. 7 years old to parents who never went to church. I want to receive my first Holy Communion, because in Italy, one doesn't receive their first Holy Communion until they're 8, 9, 10. But Carlo wanted to receive Jesus. He believed so much in the real presence of Jesus. And on that day, he said to his parents, I have a program for my life. I mean, most kids would say, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a baseball player. Carlo said, I have a program for my life, always to be united to Jesus.
I think it makes me think of, I read a story recently that said that in countries that Christianity and Catholicism is forbidden, and you have, even on the internet, they block everything that is anything to do with Jesus or Christianity or Catholicism. Jesus appears to people in dreams, and that's how you're getting conversions. Maybe it was something like that that made him someone who otherwise has no exposure from their parents to, Jesus and the Eucharist. I think there has to be something more than just even a mystery. I think something tapped him on the shoulder.
And certainly God was tapping on Carlo's shoulder. He did have a Polish babysitter who was quite Catholic, and he did have a grandmother who was quite faithful.
Oh, God.
And they were certainly influential upon him. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Carlo, from a very young age, simply, like the Virgin Mary, if we think of the Virgin Mary, she could have been maybe 13, 14 years old when the angel Gabriel appeared to her and said, you are to be the mother of God. And the Blessed Mother had promised perpetual virginity. And this completely shook up her life. But she cooperated with that message of the angel Gabriel, that you are to be the mother of God. And she simply said, let it be done according to your will. St. Augustine, our Holy Father, Pope Leo is Augustinian, and Pope Augustine tells us that Mary conceived first in faith, then in her body. And I think Carlo did the same. He conceived it in faith. He said, yes, this really is true. I can be a saint. And he said, I'm going to go for it. And then the Lord did the rest. Mother Teresa said to me, I asked Mother Teresa once, how can I be a saint, Mother? And she was a saint. She was a living saint. And I'll never forget what Mother Teresa said to me. Father, if you have the desire, God will do the rest.
That's beautiful. I feel like I've been hearing a lot of Mother Teresa stories lately. I interviewed a former Swiss guard, and he told me that he was cursing one day and he got in trouble and he had to go clean up with where the nuns lived. And then I guess as he was cleaning up, like something hit him in the face and he was cursing again. And then Mother Teresa was behind him and said, you're such a sissy. She sounds from that interaction, like she was like a kind of like a little feisty firecracker, was she?
Yeah, she was like that mighty ant, just like Sister Anthony. Yes, she was tiny, Mother Teresa. But the saints are never afraid to speak the truth. There was that prayer breakfast, I believe, with President Clinton, if I'm not mistaken, and I think everyone expecting Mother Teresa to remain there and to be at the prayer breakfast. I mean, this was the great attraction, and people had paid money to be at their prayer breakfast. But she was sitting next to President Clinton, and right at the beginning of her speech, she said, that. I'm paraphrasing, but abortion is the greatest crime, and I can't sit here next to someone who supports that. And she walked out.
Wow. I like her. I like feisty women in the Catholic Church. I think I'm one of them. I'm not nowhere near Mother Teresa. I've accomplished not even a fraction of anything that she's accomplished, but I try to be like, I'm like that naturally in my life, and now I'm trying to channel it in a positive way.
Well, I must say that that we have great male figures in the church, but the woman has a different approach. The woman has a backbone. I say that behind every man there is a woman. If we look at the Virgin Mary, I mean, she didn't ask Jesus to come down from the cross. She wasn't a sissy. And usually it is the woman in families and relationships. You have that perseverance, you have that backbone, and you have the courage to move things forward.
Yes, and most Catholics I know have such a great, strong devotion to Mary. I noticed that there's like a lot of mysteries surrounding Carlo Acutis, but I was at the canonization and I noticed that literally getting so much more attention than Giorgio Frassati. And there's a lot of like kind of blesseds that are on the way to sainthood, but Carlo, I feel like, is getting so much attention. Do you think it's because he's young, or what do you think the je ne sais quoi is about Carlo?
I think, first of all, that it is true that Carlo is getting an enormous amount of attention throughout the world. I carry his relics throughout the world, the relics we have here, which we can explain in a little while what they are, because they're really a phenomenon. At the same time, we do have to remember that Carlo followed the saints. We're in the very room, the place where St. Francis of Assisi stripped before Bishop Guido in the year 1206.
It was in this very room that Saint...
Below here, so we've excavated now the very door Francis would have walked through when he stripped completely before the bishop. That was his most important gesture, because he wanted to be all for Jesus.
Will you explain that for people who don't know it?
Because this is a really significant room. That's why I thought it'd be important to have the interview here. And that happened. That happened here, because cities are built one on top of the other, but it's below here.
So it was underneath this room that Saint Francis stripped in front of the bishop. It
is true that Carlo, there's a great following for Carlo, and certainly he's young, he's attractive, but that doesn't explain the phenomenon. There's something much more. G.K. Chesterton, he says that it's the paradox of history, that each generation is converted by the saint who most contradicts that generation. It's not necessarily the saint that those people want at that time, but it's the saint they need. So Chesterton goes on to say the saint is an antidote. He's a medicine for that generation. And what times are we living in? We are living in a cancel God culture. Cancel God culture. When we want to cancel God, I mean, there's a law going through the Canadian Parliament at this time, and it's anyone who has mental illnesses, assisted suicide. It's called the Medical Assistance in Dying Bill. Who's going to decide for them if they have mental illnesses? It's not God. We cancel God. You know what that acronym stands for, by the way? Medical Assistance in Dying? MAD. But we've turned what is mad into a good today. And Carlo Acutis points to the Eucharist, to Jesus in the Eucharist. He said, the Eucharist is my highway to heaven. That's why he wanted to go to Mass every single day, spend time in Eucharistic adoration. That's why he put the Eucharistic miracles on a website.
I have probably a lot of people who aren't Catholics watching my podcast, or even Christians. Can you explain to people what a Eucharistic miracle is?
Sure. So Carlo put 136 Eucharistic miracles on a website at the age of 12. Extraordinary. He was an internet genius, but why? He wanted people to know that Jesus was truly present in this world. So these Eucharistic miracles, a miracle is always something supernatural, beyond nature. And there are miracles where the host experiments are done that are actually, you see the fiber, flesh, you see blood, real blood. You see hosts 800 years old.
And when you say host, it's communion that you take.
Communion, yeah, the communion that have never decomposed and were used. Here in this own city, Saracens invaded this city, and they were about to enter the convent of St. Clare and rape the nuns to take God away, and St. Clare took the monstrance, pointed it to them, and they all turned back. These are miracles, Eucharistic miracles, because they tell us God is truly present. What is humanly impossible is possible, became possible. And Carlo wanted people to know that, his love of the Eucharist. And that's why God has raised Carlo up for this generation, because it's what the world needs. And there is a return. That's the wonderful thing. We see it in young people. Someone was just telling me this morning, ages 18 to 30 in the United States, there's a revival. But I've seen it in all of my travels, that revival, young people coming back to the church. And I think Carlo does have something to do with that, pointed to Jesus. At the same time, we do need to remember that Carlo followed other saints. He followed
Saint Francis of
Assisi. Also Pier Giorgio Frassati. Interesting. He followed Pier Giorgio Frassati. He knew. He researched their lives.
So cool.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, now then they were canonized together.
On the same day. That is so cool.
Yeah, it gives us hope.
Yes, yes.
But Francis of Assisi, we're actually in the room here in Assisi. Below here is where St. Francis of Assisi, the young Francis. Remember Francis, who was he? He was the king of the feasts in this city. He had a really bad life. He himself writes in his testament, I spent the first half of my life living in sin. And you know what sin is? That middle letter of sin is I. Everything is about me. And he wanted success, he wanted popularity. He used to round up his friends in this city at nighttime, and he used to take them out drinking, carousing, chasing the girls. And but then had a huge conversion experience. The cross of San Damiano speaks to him. He embraces the leper. He's in prison for almost a year because of a battle between Perugia and Assisi. And Francis wanted to be that knight in shining armor who defends his city, but he's taken a prisoner. And when he's in that prison, he hears again the words of Jesus. Francis, everything you consider sweet in your life today is going to become bitter. Everything you consider bitter in your life today is going to become sweet. They're really prophetic words.
That's
because
amazing.
That is conversion. To turn away from sin and to turn to the gospel. Isn't that when we receive ashes on our proud foreheads on Ash Wednesday, they're the words spoken to us, turn away. And Francis did that. And his life becomes really extraordinary. He's known as the crazy one in this city, Il Pazzo. And they want him thrown out of this city because he's becoming an embarrassment to his parents, his father in particular, also a wealthy man. And so his father brings him exactly where we are in this moment, Ira, below here, in the year 1206. And because in those days, the bishop could bring a judgment. And his father wants Francis denounced, thrown out of the city unless he changes. And imagine, Francis crosses a threshold. He goes through the door of the bishop's residence. He goes to the bishop. He pours out his heart, what's happened in his life, that he's begun to taste that sweetness that Jesus said is going to happen. And then he performs what I believe was his most important gesture. He strips completely naked before the bishop. In this very place. Imagine doing that to a bishop today. They probably denounce you just for that. But that bishop had discernment because he saw the heart of Francis. Francis, why did he strip naked in this very place? Because he wanted to give everything for Jesus. And he wanted also to be one with those who have absolutely nothing. He wanted to be a new creation, because in our baptism, in fact, in the early church, adults were baptized, and they would go into the baptismal font naked. And they would arise a new person in the strength of the Holy Spirit, and then be clothed with a white garment. And that was the beginning of that new creation. That happened for St. Francis in this very room in the year 1206. And it was the beginning of a huge adventure. Interesting, Ira, because Carlo too was stripped of his life at the age of 15.
So sad.
Suddenly, tragically, there was a flu bug going around his school, the end of September 2006.
Where was he living at the time, Milan?
He was living in Milan at the time. He would spend his summers here in Assisi because his parents are wealthy. His father is the president of one of the largest insurance companies in Italy. So they used to travel quite a bit. And when he came to Assisi, Carlo said, "This is the city I feel happiest of all in." Probably because there are so many saints here. You know, Assisi, there's 30 saints associated with the city. 30, yeah. Most know Francis, Clare, but, you know, for example, Clare's mother and sister entered the convent later in life.
Mother?
Yeah, mother when she was a widow, yes. So there are many saints, and Carlo he had that desire to be a saint from a very young age and wanted to be in this city. So
I was wondering the connection. I know he had a strong devotion to St. Francis, but I'm like, is there another connection? So it makes sense. He spent his summers here.
That's it. And he said, this is where I want to spend my time. I feel happiest of all here. This is where I want to be buried. But tragically, that end came. A flu bug going around his school. Then more serious symptoms appear. October the 8th, his parents take him to one of the best hospitals in Milan. As Carlo's going into that hospital, he says to his mum and dad, "I'm not coming out of here alive." He would never have known what the diagnosis was. Even more, Ira, a few months prior to his death, he's with a group of friends, and they're joking, they're laughing, they're full of joy. And at one moment, Carlo looks up, claps his hands, and says, "I'm destined to die young." He would never have known that he would contract. As you said earlier on, I think God tapped him on his shoulder. Yeah. But I think he also believed that psalm, you know, the psalm that says, "Teach us to number our days aright, so that we may gain wisdom of heart." And imagine, Mother Teresa used to say, in each sacristy of her convents, there's a sign for the priest before he celebrates Mass. "Holy priest of God, celebrate this Mass as if it were your first day, your first Mass, your last Mass, your only Mass." And I take that and I often reflect, live this day as if it were your first day, your last day, your only day. Imagine if we all lived in that optic, how things would change for us. And Carlo did. And he was stripped of his life. He died 4 days later of that diagnosis on October the 12th. 4 days. He had 4 days. 4 days to die because it was galloping leukemia and it gallops through your body. But he died serenely. He had that faith within him. It didn't come like a thief in the night. He was prepared. And that, by the way, if I may, Ira, just turn to the relics, because I think they explain what we are saying. You know, we have in this small reliquary, Carlo had a great head of hair. So this is some of the head of hair of Carlo. As Carlo was dying, and he said, as he was dying, imagine this 15-year-old boy, "I'm offering up my suffering for the Pope, for the Church, to skip purgatory and go to heaven." This cloth was placed over him, and it absorbed his sweat, his blood, his tears. So that's that relic. A little piece of Carlo's T-shirt. You know, Carlo in the tomb here in Assisi, and I hope you can show an image of that tomb, is the kid saint dressed in jeans, sneakers, a hoodie, the first saint ever to be dressed in jeans. That gives us hope, doesn't it? And so that's a little piece of Carlo's t-shirt. But the most important relic, both here and in the larger reliquary, that I take around the world, and I hope your podcast listeners, if any, wish this relic to be brought to their parish, diocese, local church, you can reach out to us here in Assisi, is a part of the pericardium. Each of us, the most important organ of our body is the heart. And but that heart needs protecting, it needs defending. And so our heart sits in a sac. It's surrounded by a membrane, which is called the pericardium, what surrounds our heart. And it really serves like a punching bag. It defends us, protects us.
Tough part of his heart.
It really is tough, yeah. And it's interesting because when Jesus was pierced on the cross, there flowed out blood and water. The blood,
Beautiful story. I know
the blood flowed from the heart of Jesus, symbol of the Eucharist. The water flowed from the pericardium of Jesus because it's filled with water. This is the pericardium of Saint Carlo Acutis. But what is important? Yes, it's important physiologically as a defense for our most important
Can
organ.
I interrupt for 1 second? My favorite part of that story of the water and the blood, when it was coming out from Jesus, the person or the guard who was standing there, he couldn't see very well, and when it went on his face, it healed him.
It healed him, yeah.
And he was blind, and he was no longer blind.
Exactly.
And then he had a conversion.
Absolutely, it's an amazing story, and yeah,
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. So keep going.
It's beautiful because we are healed by the blood.
Yes.
Of Jesus, but let's think. Carlo, at the age of 7, he said to his parents, "I have a program for my life, always to be united to Jesus." So that relationship with Jesus was what was most important to him spiritually, to save his soul, to save the souls of others. And so that needed protecting. And Carlo protected that relationship with Jesus, nurtured that relationship with Jesus such that he was prepared for suffering and death through 5 appointments in his life. This is something I myself have discovered. I was here for the beatification of Carlo Acutis in the year 2020, and I went back that evening to my apartment here, and I was just fascinated why there was such a great following. I really didn't know Carlo prior to that, and just reading, talking with his parents, Antonio and Andrea. Not a lot was written about him, but I discovered that Carlo kept 5 appointments in his life daily or as often as he needed them. And this formed his spiritual pericardium, formed his punching bag, his spiritual punching bag to protect that relationship with Jesus. Carlo tried to go to Mass every single day. Carlo prayed before the tabernacle, Eucharistic adoration. Carlo had a spiritual director and frequently confessed his sins, the 3rd appointment. The 4th appointment, Carlo loved the Blessed Virgin Mary and the saints. He followed them. And the 5th appointment is what all the saints do, they love. So small acts of charity, usually small and hidden. They are the 5 appointments that Carlo kept and became that spiritual pericardium in order to defend what was most important to him, the relationship with Jesus, and prepare him to face the battles of life. And this is not only for a Christian, a Catholic, it is for anyone. This is the beauty of Carlo. He's not asking us to found a religious congregation. He's not asking us to go on foreign missions. He's not asking us to write treatises on the Trinity or on the Eucharist. He's simply saying, Follow this simple path to holiness, and you will. I wrote this little book.
Oh, yes, I want to
That
hear
is,
all about it.
yes, it's coming. I already wrote a first version, 5 Steps to Being a Saint, and now this updated version is coming out, the miracles. And I've seen miracles myself of Carlo through my missions, and the 5 Steps to Being a Saint with all of his sayings of Carlo. I really recommend it. Pope Leo has actually drawn upon it for some of his homilies, including the canonization homily, because we need to be saints.
I'm gonna go and pray for a miracle, a small miracle, and I'm hoping for one. But if I don't get one, I'm totally fine.
All in God's will, but aim high, aim
I'll
high,
aim high.
aim high. And Carlo is becoming that saint who acts quite quickly, from what we're hearing.
You were telling me that he appears in a lot of exorcisms.
He does. We're hearing this from exorcists, that the relic of Carlo is powerful. Is powerful to take people out of situations where there is demonic influence. And it doesn't surprise me, because Carlo, deep down, is the saint of the young. That's the title of the book, but he's also the saint of the Eucharist. And where the Eucharist appears, the devil flees.
That is 100% true. Did Carlo ever talk about the rosary?
Oh, absolutely. And Carlo loved the Blessed Virgin Mary. He said, the Virgin Mary is the only woman in my life. And, as a young kid, he would never pass a church without going before a statue of the Blessed Mother. His own earthly mother says he would pick up flowers on his way and put them before the Virgin Mary. But he would pray the rosary, and he would call the rosary the most grace-filled appointment of my day. The rosary, he said, is the shortest ladder to heaven.
I have a friend of mine who's an exorcist, and he has been called to train the Navy SEAL in battle, so spiritual warfare. So I thought that was kind of cool that governments are like kind of coming around to what we're already doing.
Absolutely. And Mother Teresa would say, the rosary, they're bullets for heaven. They're bullets. And we do need to enter into that spiritual warfare, because something interesting which is happening with Carlo is that the devil is very much at work. He doesn't like it. And that's going to happen. That's going to happen. In fact, I was just talking to someone this morning. She's someone here in Assisi, and she said, I met her outside the sanctuary. She's a teacher, quite a famous teacher. And she said, isn't this fantastic about Carlo? But she says the proof that he's really the saint we need is because so many people in this town are against him.
In
Assisi.
Oh, really?
Fascinating.
He was beloved here.
No, fascinating. He's beloved for people who come from outside the city.
But within Assisi, they're not into it.
And we shouldn't be surprised, because it's exactly what happened to St. Francis. Remember, they wanted him thrown out of this city.
Interesting.
And exactly the same happens. Why? Because it all comes down to money. Money.
And I don't get it.
Yeah, so basically, the accusation very often is that his parents bought the canonization because they're wealthy. In fact, it's the complete opposite, because the parents actually had to fork out a lot of money pay for this canonization. And just the facts speak for themselves. Carlo is a phenomenon worldwide, and his parents have never asked once for any royalties from his images, and yet all the shops in Assisi have his image everywhere.
You make a very, very good point.
And that's exactly where the evil one works. And we have to be attentive that our battle is not against flesh and blood. So it's not the people, but it's against the spirits wanting.
I have to ask you a question. Did you hear about the assassination of Charlie Kirk?
What? Yeah.
I have never felt so sad and such a visceral reaction. I followed him. I mean, pretty decently, but I didn't follow him like, oh my gosh, like every single day. But I had such a tough time. I'm having such a tough time with his death. And I am just feeling like it's feels a little like spiritual warfare to me.
Mm.
And I'm seeing such nasty things and reactions to somebody, a father, a husband, of like, it's just so sad. Do you feel that way too? Do you feel like there's something demonic going on here?
There's no doubt about it. When someone is assassinated, it's something demonic. It's something completely insane. Uh, and yet, original sin exists. And we're living the consequences of original sin and the effects of certain laws, I must say, that have brought about this confusion in life. We live in a very divided, confused society, whether it's with LGBT issues, whatever it is, it's a very confused society. And there is such anger in people for not being who they are called to be, people with souls loved by God, that that frustration has to be taken out on those who proclaim good. Didn't that happen with Jesus? And it's happened now with Charlie, and it is tragic, but God brings good from it. The battle's already won. And I was just impressed by his good Catholic wife, who said to her little daughter, tragic, imagine losing a father. So this beautiful little girl was told, Daddy's gone on a long journey with Jesus, and this beautiful mom is saying, she's speaking with faith, and she's saying, Daddy's alive, and he's going to do even more good from heaven. In fact, she continued that this young boy, this kid, confused, tragic, has unleashed a new power in the world. Because remember, Ira, had Jesus not died, we would not have had salvation. On the Easter night, what do we proclaim? The night of nights, the vigil, we say, oh, happy fault that deserved so great a Savior. And certainly it's tragic, but yet God uses everything for a greater good. We've got to have those eyes of faith.
What is your advice to all of us, like just the world in general, mostly the United States, about this whole tragedy?
Certainly, again, I would emphasize it's tragic. Taking someone's life, whether it's the unborn baby in someone's womb, whether it's an elderly person through assisted suicide, whether it's taking someone's life out through violence. It's tragic and completely unacceptable. And it cries out to heaven. These sins cry out to heaven. And there is a judgment. There is a judge. And our sins have consequences in this life and in the next. At the same time, I want to give a word of hope that nothing is wasted. We see that in Carlo Acutis, his life stripped at a young age. We see that in the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ. Nothing was wasted. And God's not going to waste this tragedy of an assassination. He's going to use it for a greater glory. It means don't give up. Don't be discouraged. You know, the greatest trick of the devil, the greatest instrument that the devil has, is to discourage us and to say, give up, stop, be afraid. That's what terrorism does. You know what terrorism does? It wants to make us afraid and fearful and live in fear. That's what the devil did in the original sin. You know, they were fearful. That's why they hid, remember? He hid, Adam and Eve. Let's not hide. Let's be courageous. Let's be brave. And we will set this world on fire. St. Catherine of Siena, another great woman, a woman on fire. What does she say? Be true to who you are. You will set the world on fire. That's the word I want to give your listeners, whether they're Christian, Catholic, whoever they are, be true to who you are. You will set the world on fire.
I have one more question about this. They're talking about this boy getting the death penalty. What do you think?
Personally, I do not agree with the death penalty. Again, there are consequences to our actions, to our sins, and there needs to be some justice. There's no doubt about it, and the right justice. But I truly believe that God can convert. I don't know if you know the story of Saint Maria Goretti. You know, it's Saint
I
Maria
know her
Goretti
story really
tragedy.
well, so well that I shot a short film on it. I'll invite you to the, we're doing an,
beautiful. But do you know, I just heard this the other day, Ira, that her assassin, Alessandro Serenelli, who then entered, I believe, the Franciscans, then took care of Maria's mother when she was old. Do you know that his cause is open now to be a saint?
I'm a little shocked, but I feel like I know so much about the story because, like I told you, I shot a short film on Maria Goretti that's coming out. We will debut it at the Vatican. You will get an invitation. But he changed his life around, and he was an inspiration. I mean, I guess he was the original person that brought the idea of porn addiction. Like, nobody knew. Like he said, it was because he was into those, addicted to those magazines that kind of paved the way to this horrific crime. And I think he changed his life as Jesus to basically use him as an instrument, as an example of forgiveness for others. So he's to be canonized. Okay, so I guess what you're saying is something good could come out of this still, and we should not give up on anyone.
That is the key. Imagine my parents had listened to those doctors and said, yeah, I'm going to terminate Anthony's life.
It's a very good point. I have to kind of think about this because I get angry. I get angry and I just want like justice. And what's the church's position on the death penalty?
Well, it's, Pope Francis certainly made it very clear in his view that the death penalty should not exist in any form, and I believe changed the catechism in that direction. So I would say that is the church's position, but it doesn't take away from the fact that, again, there are consequences, and there does need to be a measure of justice. It's just the protection of life. We can't say we're going to protect the baby in the womb and elderly people, and then take someone's life, however horrendous the crime is.
I agree.
It simply would not make sense in the Catholic.
Who's your favorite saint, Father?
I have many.
Who's your top three?
Okay, so let me tell you a story. In my room, in my residence, I have relics of some 100 saints, and they're all beautifully displayed in my room. And when people say to me, Father, it must be very lonely being a priest and this celibate lifestyle, and you come back here on your own in the evenings. And I always say to them, well, I sleep with 100 different people every night. And that kind of confuses them. But I say I have 100 saints who are here with me, because there is a communion of saints. So I love all the saints. Certainly, I would say the top three, and there are many.
I have a feeling I know your top two.
You know, Mother Teresa.
Oh, that's one I want to. That's not the one I thought you were going to lead with. Okay.
Saint John Paul II. Also, I love Saint John Marie Vianney. You know, he's a great saint. You know, because he was this saint who really shouldn't have been a priest, but was ordained. I mean, he didn't do well at school. He almost was never ordained, but then became a priest, became a saint. And John Marie Vianney says this: not all the saints began well, but they all ended well. And I think that gives us great hope. But I think high on my list now, he's trumping the others, Saint Carlo Acutis. And
I love it.
He is that saint that we need for these times. Not necessarily the saint the world wants, but he is that medicine. He is that antidote. And it's not so much, Ira, that we follow him. I've discovered that he attaches himself to us, a little bit like Saint Therese of Lisieux, and he becomes our friend in heaven, Saint Carlo Acutis.
For those people that don't know his patronage, he's the patron saint of youth, Eucharistic miracle, or just the Eucharist?
Eucharist, I would say, saint of the Eucharist.
Anything else?
I would say certainly he's revered, not officially, but as the patron saint of the internet.
That's true. I knew that.
He was an internet genius, and one of his great heroes was Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple. And he used to repeat a phrase of Steve Jobs, which I think is very telling. He used to repeat it to his friends: "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." Carlo would say, "We're all born originals. Most of us end up as photocopies. Be true to who you are." And then Steve Jobs would continue, "I'm not interested in ending up the richest man in the cemetery. What interests me is going to bed in the evening and saying, today I did something fantastic." That's life. That's joy. And that's the invitation. Pope Leo ended his homily at the canonization. Carlo Acutis, Pier Giorgio Frassati are an invitation not to waste life, but to make of it a masterpiece. A masterpiece. And the secret of their holiness is what Carlo used to repeat: not I, but God. And Pier Giorgio Frassati: put God at the center of all your actions, and then you will reach the goals that you have for your life.
Love that. What's your favorite prayer?
I would say I love the Memorare.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I turn to the Blessed Mother frequently during the day, and Mother Teresa used to say to me, "Pray to Mary to be a mother to you now and always." Now and always. So often I pray to Our Lady, the Memorare, and she comes to help me. Carlo, too, had a little prayer whenever he received Jesus in the Eucharist. And I think this is a prayer for your listeners. It helps me whenever I face difficulties, challenges, discouragement, temptations. And it's a simple prayer. Jesus, come right in. Make yourself at home. Jesus, come right in. Make yourself at home. Repeat that often, and you will witness the serenity, the peace that it gives you, because Jesus comes right in and makes himself at home and removes whatever is bringing us down.
I know you worked with 3 different popes. You worked with 3 different popes. I'm going to say their name, and you tell me one word that just pops into your mind. St. John Paul II.
Open people's hearts.
Benedict.
Filled people's hearts.
Francis.
What are you going to do with what's been open and filled? Take it to the peripheries of the world.
Okay, great. I love it. Thank you so much, Monsignor. What a wealth of knowledge you are. And you really were one of my favorite interviews.
Thank you so much.
I am going next door now to get on my knees and ask for a tiny favor from Carlo Acutis.
He'll do it.
Beyond Saint in Assisi. Thank you so much.
And may we, Ira, bless your viewers with the relic?
Bless
with the relic of Carlo Acutis.
Yes.
May we give a blessing?
Please.
I think as we have the heart relic. And as I give this blessing, perhaps your listeners can ask for a grace of Saint Carlo Acutis.
Want me to hold it, or you want to hold it?
Through the intercession of Saint Carlo Acutis, his heart relic, we pray for all of your listeners, those of the past, those of the present, those of the future, that they may take to their hearts, to their own hearts, the words of Saint Carlo. You too can be a saint. You need to desire it. And you need to desire it by beginning to ask the Lord for that, beginning today. May Carlo help you all from heaven, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.